So where are you right now?
I'm in Syracuse, New York right now.
I thought, are you not on the road right now, or is like the
We have
Edmonton
a,
date?
we have a couple days in between. We parted ways with the Goo Goo Dolls for some of the. I guess we're not doing Thunder Bay, Winnipeg, and Regina, and we're just going to fly out to Edmonton and meet them there and finish off the western part with them there.
Nice. So who's in this band? Who are you playing with nowadays?
Right now it's myself and three brothers, the Baird brothers, Bryden, Jesse, and Jay, who I've actually known Bryden for a long time. He's a trumpet player and a keyboard player, and he and his brothers were Feist's band for the last bunch of years. And I stole them from her, and we're having a great time.
Yeah, which would make me think it would be a little more indie sounding. And the record, well, compared to the Barenaked Ladies, is very indie sounding, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, in a certain way, but it's also kind of a pop record too. And it's a funny thing. The nice thing about these songs I've realized is that they're really malleable. I've been able to do them from solo acoustic, where I did a bunch of shows where it was myself and cellist, like I did at the folk festival a couple years ago. And
Right.
Then we had this core group of myself and the Baird brothers, with a couple string players as well for some of the shows that we did on our own. And the four piece, it's a little more straight ahead. Rock, indie pop, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, well, and there's different sounds. I mean, even A New Shore, it's got those mariachi like clacker things in there, and the
That's
flute
right,
solo.
Exactly. It's got all this stuff. It's got whistling in it.
Yeah,
those the castanets. I'm a sucker for
castanets. That's the word. That's right.
Yeah.
You must be writing more of the instrumentation, I would think, on a record like this, on your own disc.
I am. Yeah, that was the nice thing about making this record is I could kind of go as hog wild as I want to or not want to in these situations. Or I could, get some help from somebody who is maybe a more adept orchestrator than I am. But quite often, like a song like A New Shore, I could go and just start, singing out the parts that I wanted to hear, or I'd start programming them into the computer, and then, hire people to play them for me, and it was pretty awesome that way.
How different did you approach songwriting for this? I know you did the Vanity Project record a few years ago, so I would assume maybe to be similar to that.
Well, and in a lot of ways, it's not that different from the way I would have written when I was in Barenaked Ladies. I mean, the biggest difference is that I didn't have the other guys to go bounce ideas off of later or get their approval. But as far as the way I would sit down and write, very similar. I still come up with ideas independently and try to work as hard as I can in order to get them to say what I want them to say, the way I do. But it is a different thing when you don't have to worry about what everybody else thinks. And it's really just to make sure that you're satisfied with your own work. So in a certain way, I had to work harder, because I didn't have to rely on anybody else because I didn't have those deadlines and those kinds of goals to meet. I had to push myself, but then at the same time, I like the fact that I'm pretty hard on myself as well. So it allows me to feel like I'm not being overly self-indulgent either.
What made you do it? What was the impetus for this solo disc? Did you start thinking about it before you left the band, or would it have been after?
Well, because I'd done the Vanity Project in 2005, and I always had assumed there'd be another solo record, but at that point, I looked at those things as being kind of side projects, and when I realized that this was no longer a side project and was my full-time job, it made it pretty exciting for me. But some of the songs do date back from before the time when I was still with Barenaked Ladies.
And they just didn't fit in, or what?
Well, yeah, some of them are ones that, let's say, if I wrote some ones I wrote with Stephen Duffy, they didn't fit in with kind of the band's ethic, because at that point the band didn't want to do songs that were done with outside writers. So I was kind of holding on to some of those for next solo record, and then other ones were ones I would have presented to the group if I'd stayed in the group for their next record. And then after the split, I had another rush of creativity, which allowed me to sit down and write a whole bunch of new songs.
Was it a different kind of creativity? Would it have been like not a saddened creativity, but I mean, you're coming from a different place after splitting with friends for a long time, right?
Oh, sure, yeah. There's certainly a sense of catharsis, I guess, to it. But, writing is always an opportunity to process what you're going through in your life and to reimagine yourself, too. And I knew that after I split that I had to be busy. I mean, I had to go out and start playing shows, and I had to keep writing songs, because I think otherwise you could start to spiral into kind of self-pity and stuff, and I didn't want that. I wanted to use this opportunity to do the things that I'd, dreamed about late at night and couldn't tell people about, and that was my opportunity to kind of to see those things to fruition.
How are you pulling the songs off live? Sorry to get back to the topic of the concert here, but because there's a lot of production on these songs. There's a lot of stuff that I don't know how you're going to do live.
Well, it depends on the song, but some of them end up getting a lot more stripped down. But songs like "A New Shore," it's funny. Like Bryden, he plays keyboards and trumpet and glockenspiel and accordion and all kinds of stuff. And it always reminds me of the scene in Waiting for Guffman when they keep showing the guy in the orchestra pit playing the trumpet and the timpanis and stuff. It's kind of like that. He's got like 5 different instruments on the go, which is sometimes very entertaining.
Are there any Barenaked Ladies songs that come up? Do you play the old songs too?
Oh yeah, I play a lot of the ones that people would remember that I sing or I sang in the band. Stuff like Jane and Old Apartment and Brian Wilson.
Do you think they're still playing your songs? How are they gonna? How is the Barenaked Ladies gonna pull off doing your songs without your voice? Because it's kind of
it's funny. I haven't really seen. I know it's out there on YouTube. It's not something I go and seek out.
No, I wouldn't think you would.
Be like torturing myself a little bit, but there's lots of songs that they've had that are hits that Ed sings. So I think that wouldn't make a huge difference.
No, but I mean, you go to Barenaked Ladies concert, you still want to hear Brian Wilson, I think.
Exactly. So I think they do that stuff, and that's got to be. It's probably more strange in a certain way for those guys than it is for the audience. I think once you're there inside the context of a show and you're just hearing all those songs in the package, I would suspect it's probably not that big a deal. And I've heard lots of bands cover our songs in the past, and these guys aren't even. I mean, I think they're the guys on the record except for the voice. So
yeah. Well, I guess Brian Wilson even covered that song, didn't he, on that one tour?
That's right, he did.
That must have been something else for you, hey? That must have been just like the pinnacle of I've succeeded.
That was totally mind-blowing. I mean, the first time we heard his version of it, he came into the studio where we were working in L.A. and played it for us. I had no idea this was coming, and it was totally mind-blowing. And then a few months later, he came to Toronto to play a show, and he started the show with that song. I didn't even know how to react. I didn't know whether to kind of stand up and wave at the audience or like hide under my feet or what. But it's just, really like surreal, and you could never dream of something like that.
Is that what you grew up on, Beach Boys? What did you grow up on? What were the records you remember as a kid?
Boys, actually, I was a huge Beatles fan as a kid. I still am, but I mean, I was obsessed. And also, I guess I grew up in the early '80s, so a lot of the stuff I liked was kind of the post-punk new wave stuff. Mm-hmm. But always based in that kind of songcraft is always the most important thing. It wasn't really until I was in university that I had a friend introduce me to the Beach Boys, because I always saw them as being kind of overly simple, kind of fluffy, and then he introduced me more to the kind of the depth of the story and of Brian Wilson's kind of orchestral genius, I guess. Mm-hmm. That really got me into the depths of their music and let me explore that.
Do you mind if I ask what happened with the Barenaked Ladies?
You know what? At the end of the day, it was over 20 years being together, and we had grown apart. We just weren't, in a lot of ways, didn't feel like we were in the same band as each other anymore. Mm. And I think when crisis starts to happen, like when I was arrested and so on, I gone through a bunch of other things like divorce and major life changes. I think it forces everybody to figure out how they're going to survive the next turn of events. And I think that what happened was that the other 4 guys, I think, strengthened their bond with each other. And I kind of was forging my own path, and we fought for quite a long time in order to keep the band happening. I think we all believed in it really, really strongly, but there came a point where it just wasn't working. We were about to go into the studio to make another record, and I didn't have enough songs, and I wasn't ready for it, and I really wanted to go out on the road and kind of try to reestablish our bond that way. And they felt they needed to make a record, and at that point, it was like, this is when we have to make the break.
That's like the Beatles almost. Wanted to go on the road versus making a record.
Yeah, I think, in a lot of ways, I mean, those guys grew apart a lot faster than we did. We worked really hard together, and we were a great team. But it was, like I said, it was over 20 years. And when you start a band when you're 18, and then you're nearly 40, and realize you're not exactly the same person you were when you were a teenager, and don't always have the same goals as each other anymore. That's the way it's kind of the way it goes, and it wasn't easy. It was a lot of adjustments for all of us. It was emotional, but it was. I don't think there's huge amounts of hard feelings there.
It must be interesting for you as well to almost start anew. I mean, you're opening shows for the Goo Goo Dolls now. You're doing the opening slots again. Is that a fun thing?
Well, it certainly encourages a degree of humility, which I appreciate. I mean, you have no idea what your own value is as a solo artist when you break out on your own. There's no one out there doing market research or anything like
Mm-hmm.
on a TV show or something. You'd have that kind of stuff happening. But I love it. I like the fact that you can go out there. One of the great things that I think BNL always did was when we opened for another act or when we played on a festival or whatever else, you have your built-in audience, which is great. But one of the great challenges is winning over the rest of the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And whether there are people who just don't know who you are or they're skeptical or whatever else, and you spend the time on stage winning them over. I love that challenge, and that's kind of what this feels like as well. And the Goo Goo Dolls have been great to tour with, really accommodating and easy to work with.
I was wondering if I get a couple of clips, like songwriting clips, storytellers kind of things on a few of the songs that we play.
Yeah, sure.
We'll start with the new single, Indecision.
All right. Well, Indecision actually predates my split from BNL, and it's been sitting around for a little while, but it's in a certain way it was kind of the theme song for a lot of my earlier part of my life. A lot of my songs, if you look at them earlier on, are about that, like what a good boy says, so afraid of change, afraid of saying the same. Mm-hmm. And, I've certainly made a lot of changes in my life and in my music over the last few years, and Indecision was a nice way to kind of introduce the fact that I actually made the jump.
The single that's about to be released, Overjoy.
Overjoy, in a certain way, has a lot in common with my song Brian Wilson. They're both about it's about dealing with depression, and where Brian Wilson is about the power of music to help you come out of that. Overjoy kind of asks the question: do we sometimes like to wallow in our own blues sometimes, and what's the cause of it? But when it came to actually making the record of it, started playing it, and I'd imagined it as being kind of a Beatlesy 60s kind of feeling song, but as we started recording it, realized we were almost heading in this kind of Jeff Lynne, Traveling Wilburys kind of way, which I love. And I totally love that stuff. So we kind of tried to imagine that perhaps this was a song off of Tom Petty's Full Moon Fever or something.
There's a keyboard note in that tune that I really dig. It goes to like a blues chord just before the instrumental bit.
Yeah.
Was that your idea? Who came up with that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do know exactly what you're talking about. Sometimes it's those moments in the studio where that was me and my co-producer John Fields just kind of jamming through a bunch of stuff and then working on backup vocals, and sometimes those notes just kind of happen and you go, yes, keep it.
Mm-hmm. Or do you play keys at all?
Yep, I play. I'm not a great player, but I know how to get the sounds I want to get. The nice thing about making a record that way is you have the opportunity to kind of do things over and over and over again until you get it right, or you can keep your mistakes in there and nobody else is going to say that it's bad if you like it.
Do you ever write on piano, or is it always guitar?
I usually write on guitar, but I'll use quite often when I'm sitting I do a lot of writing in front of the computer with Pro Tools and that kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
It's just a handy way to work. Like in the old days, I used to sit with a 4-track cassette recorder and write parts, because a lot of how I like to write is based around vocal harmonies and stuff. And it's really easy to do with a computer now. You can stack things like crazy and try all kinds of different layers of things and see what works and what doesn't work. So quite often I'll sit there and bang something out on guitar, and then I'll jump over to a keyboard right away and move things around. And the nice thing also about a keyboard instrument is you can often change the sounds and sketch out what will eventually become horn parts or string parts or backup vocals.
Right. Yeah. Or even drums nowadays, with a keyboard.
That's right. Yeah, indeed.
I know we kind of talked about Brian Wilson, but if you could talk about writing it, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, Brian Wilson I wrote, I think when I was about 19 or 20. That's always one of those things when you're older and you think, God, one of my best songs, or best love songs is something I wrote when I was so much younger. Can't let it get you down, but because you just look at it as a gift more than anything else. But it's a song that I wrote initially. The kind of the form of the song, I was thinking about how John Mann from Spirit of the West would construct a song. A song like, think Home for a Rest. It starts with that first verse slow, and then he repeats it at the very end of the song, but it's twice the tempo. And that's kind of like what Brian Wilson starts with. It starts with that slow first verse, and then evolves, and by the end the last verse is the same as the first, but it's at double tempo.
We do something on the show called 5 questions. 5 quick questions, 1-word answers.
Yeah.
Road or studio?
Studio.
Lennon or McCartney?
McCartney.
Most important thing in a song: lyrics, melody, or rhythm?
Melody.
Song you've written you're most proud of?
A New Shore.
And is that why it opens the disc?
I think so. I think when that song was finished, I realized it was kind of the credo for this new record, and I also opened the live show with it. I think it's got a great mix of what is kind of classic Stephen Page mixed with looking forward to the future.
Yeah, well, and the title alone, just it's a new day, right?
Yep.
And in one word, Stephen Page.
Awesome.
Amazing. I know you're a big NDPer. I used to be. I've kind of switched to green more recently, but I've got Jack Layton on the show next week. I'm wondering if you have any questions for him.
I want to know, does he see an actual change in the way this country's attitudes can change positively? I myself get very depressed at how, in general, in North America, there seems to be this kind of, in the name of libertarianism, this sense of intolerance and lack of wanting to help other people. How do we change that so that we can remember that Canadian values are often based in how we help each other?
There's a band called Jets Overhead out of Victoria, I think, that just wrote a song called Bystander. That's all about that, about just being a bystander to all the problems that are around us.
Right.
And
I mean, I see in the United States there's this whole debate about health care. It's like, well, I don't want to be responsible for somebody else's health problems. Well, I mean, it's part of what makes Canada the great country it is that we've accepted that that part of what we do takes care of each other.
But you've left us now.
Well, no, I'm a half-halfer.
Half and halfer. Do you still vote in Canada, or can you vote in the States now?
No, I vote in Canada.